Just to give you a very personal example, my son was diagnosed with autism. At the time of his diagnosis, I was a director. I had teams under me. I had an 8 a.m. appointment with the center who did his diagnosis. I got the news. I walked out of there. My world was rocked. I had a 9:30 meeting. I walked into that meeting. I led that meeting. No one knew a thing. I left that meeting. I went into the bathroom and just bawled. I cried because you don't show weakness at work, right?
Yeah.
But actually, that's holism. That's wholeness. That is all welcoming all of the things.
What Megan shared is what I see again and again with women in tech. We handle crisis quietly. So we lead meetings while our nervous system is screaming. And then we act shocked when we are depleted, resentful, and starting to mentally quit. And the mistake most people don't realize they are making is thinking that this is a strength, because it's not. It's a system and it's costing you. And in this episode, I've joined by Megan Warren. She's the founder and coach of Extraordinary Lives, where transformation is designed from within. She works with high-achieving women who checked every box and still feel like something is missing. And today we're using her lens of regenerative leadership to talk about one core shift. Stop leading like a machine, start leading like a living system. And you learn what to say in meetings when you are not okay without trauma dumping. 5-minute reset that lowers tension so people stop walking on eggshells. How to make better prioritization decisions when everyone has urgent needs. Why locking it up blocks innovation and makes teams anxious. And how to lead with accountability without pretending you have infinite capacity. And I want to welcome you to From a Woman to a Leader. My name is Limor Bergman Gross. I'm your host, and you have reached the podcast where we talk about the challenges that women face in the tech industry. And I'm here to amplify women and support you in your journey, because I've been there. And if you are done performing competence while quietly burning out, I want to invite you to listen to the episode with Megan today and share this episode and this podcast with every woman that needs to hear it. So are you ready? Let's dive right in. Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Lovely to have you here. And super excited to talk about something I haven't talked about. So a while back when we met, we said we're going to talk about regenerative leadership. And I'd love if you can give some background to our audience. What is it and why is it timely?
Sure. I think actually one way to best explain this is to tie it to what we know. And we all know business as usual, do we not? That feeling of when you walk in the office, you take off your professional mask, you take off your personal mask, you put your professional one on, you go in, you don't think about the fight that you had with your partner, or that your child is sick, or that you need to get groceries before you go home. You leave all of that and you focus on what you're supposed to be doing. And you're supposed to bring your whole self there in terms of creativity and innovation and engagement. And yet that business as usual, that sort of extractive mindset isn't really working. And I think a lot of us intuitively feel that. And I see it as we're going through a time where business as usual worked right up until we realize that you can only extract so much, and we feel depleted and burnt out and neglected in a way. We're actually neglecting ourselves as well as businesses neglecting us. And the blood, sweat, and tears you give your business is often not given back to you when you most need it. And so I think what's happening is that there's the great unraveling. People are realizing this model doesn't work. This model takes us away from nature. It isn't life affirming. And so we are at a pivotal point, and this is why I love this topic and why it's so relevant for right now, is because we're at the moment of the great turning. We're leaving the great unraveling, where you're seeing more conflict, you're seeing complex problems that our business training, it didn't train us to solve these complex problems. It trained us to solve complicated problems. And now AI is accelerating everything at a rate that we're going to need new ways of being, new ways of coming together in order to actually find solutions to these things. And so that's where regenerative leadership comes in. It's and a regenerative approach in general to business, both to your personal life, your life as a leader. Self-leadership is the first level and the primary level of leadership. And then taking that into our businesses. How do we come together? How do we change the ways that we come together to move from an extractive paradigm into a new paradigm that's regenerative, that's life-giving, that's life-affirming, that replenishes as we give to it? So I can go further into that, but that's essentially setting the stage for what we're going to look at today.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that this hard separation, kind of what I'm hearing from you, that traditionally, and tell me if I understood it correctly, like traditionally, we try to separate to create a clear separation between our personal lives and our professional life. And that caused a lot of challenges, right? Because we are like human beings and we have our own challenges, and we cannot just, okay, I entered the office, so I'm leaving all the things I was worried about or consumed my energy behind, and just kind of wear kind of the corporate or the business hat or mask or whatever you want to call it. Did I understand it correctly?
You did.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just to give you a very personal example, my son was diagnosed with autism. This is not a bad thing in my life, but at the time of his diagnosis, 7 years ago, I was a director. I had teams under me. I had an 8 a.m. appointment with the center who did his diagnosis. I got the news. I walked out of there. My world was rocked. I had a 9:30 meeting. I walked into that meeting. I led that meeting. No one knew a thing. I left that meeting. I went into the bathroom and just bawled. I cried because you don't show weakness at work, right?
Yeah.
But actually, that's holism. That's wholeness. That is all welcoming all of the things. And in terms to lead that meeting, what I had to do was lock it up. But when you lock it up, you then don't allow anything to be received. So I was trying to control it all to show that I had it together. And so this idea that you're in front of all those people, you're supposed to have all the answers. No, you're not. No, you're not. Where did we learn that? We did. But now, for what we've got coming, the problems are different. Retention has changed. The business problems that we look at are different. What's coming? And so, and what's already here. And so coming in to a meeting and saying, look, guys, I just got some big news. I'm struggling to process this. So whether I ask for input and have someone else kind of take over the leading the meeting so that the creativity isn't stifled, so that the input is received, so that they can hold me as a leader because I have so many times held them. That doesn't mean I'm not setting a direction. It means that I'm setting a realistic direction, a direction that welcomes who we are as people and is sustainable, regenerative. When I
Thank
say
you.
that, it's way outside of, I think, a lot of times what happens in the traditional world. So what do you think of that when you
First of
hear
all,
that?
Megan, thank you so much for sharing. I think that it's very courageous to be able. It takes a lot of courage to be able to come to work and say, "Hey, there are things going on, right? I'm vulnerable. I'm a human being. I have things happening in my life, and it could be multiple things, right? I mean, and like my brother committed suicide almost 3 months ago. And this is something that is heavily impacting me and my family. And I don't talk about it all the time, but I do write about it occasionally and I do talk about it. And yeah, there could be multiple things that are happening in our life. And I wish we could bring ourselves to the business world, but I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. And I just don't know how to help, especially women, right? I work a lot with women to have that courage, to be vulnerable, to be human. That's kind of my
You're right.
take.
It does take courage. And it's funny in some ways. I think for women, it takes maybe more courage because of the fact that a lot of times we've left big pieces of ourselves in order to fit into that armored up paradigm where you don't show emotion. And when we've lost touch with that, it's really hard sometimes to find those pieces again, to find the softness and to understand that softness is actually strength. Because if you look at something that takes a lot of force, if it doesn't flex and bend, if it's not soft, then it breaks.
Agreed.
And so where we can bring that softness in as a strength to add to our strength, because showing up vulnerably, oh, that is the most courageous thing you can do. And what's cool is that when you do that, you model it for your whole team. The young people coming in, the interns who are in your meetings watching and observing, I mean, they witness this and they say, that's real leadership. That's who I want to be. And
I agree.
I want to be clear that when I say show up with your whole self, I mean, show up with your whole self, but show up with accountability as well. Because walking into that meeting and laying my whole family story on the table and sobbing, that's not the moment for it. That's not what I'm advocating for. I'm showing up with accountability. But I'm also showing up with accountability in that when I lock it up and I show up in that meeting, I realize that I'm not hearing, I'm not processing, I'm not supporting, I'm not leading from behind so that they shine, because in that moment, I'm not resourced. I'm not able to do that. And no leader is supposed to be able to do that in all moments, I guess you could say. But to acknowledge them, to ask for support, such that actually the bottom line is better protected, right? Your team is going to create something more innovative if because have you ever walked into a room and you know something is going on, but you don't know what? And there's such tension and you're looking around and nobody has any expression on their face and something's happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that kind of thing. You spend more time intuitively trying to read that, understand that, what's going on, and it makes you feel insecure and anxious. And then it distracts you so that the energy doesn't flow into creativity, relationship, innovation, the things that spark true success. And they've measured this in many different studies that I can send you a list of if you want to
Definitely.
put in
Please
the
do.
show notes. But So this is not just a woo-woo approach, right? This is not just when we say words like life affirming, etc., I think a lot of people in some way resonate with those words because what they're doing now is not. How
Yeah.
many of us are literally walking dead? So I had a job for a long time, and I was taking the tram 2 stops past where I needed to get off because I couldn't make myself go into work. But I was successful on paper. I was checking all those boxes. I looked great. Everyone told me I was a success. It didn't feel like a success. And because of that, it shows up in my work. I mean, absolutely, I'm still a success. I still made it to the top. How much more could I have been doing if I felt like I was in a life affirming position? And I could speak up and say, this isn't working for me. Let's do something new. Let's do it this way. But so many of us stay quiet and we don't speak up, but we're not the only ones that it's not working for. And so then that level of not being able to express yourself, not feeling seen and heard, those are very basic needs that everybody has.
For sure. Yeah. And very much relate to what you said, because I felt that in different phases, of my career as well. And I see that also with my clients. They're suppressing so much that eventually they break, right? I mean, they either leave or they just experience, burn down or whatever. And let's be a little bit practical. I mean, can you share just some key principles of regenerative leadership and how you can apply them?
Sure. So I think it's an intentional awareness to yourself and your place and your role in a much broader ecosystem. A lot of us think of our families, a lot of us think of wherever we work, and then our friends. And that's kind of our ecosystem. But it's an understanding. And a lot of times, even that ecosystem shrinks, right? The minute something starts to go wrong, well, you're not thinking about friends. You're thinking about your immediate, whatever's happening in your immediate and whoever's connected to that. And so we put the blinders on and it goes like this. And when you put that in context in business, for example, and you're in a meeting and you're talking about something where there's a crisis and you've got to figure it out, and those blinders go on, how well do you think you're going to be able to look at the big picture and actually solve that? Well, it's this idea that you need to look at things in terms of nested systems awareness. So you are a system yourself. What's going on inside of you is a system, and how well it functions impacts the larger system, which is the small group, your team, let's say, which impacts the larger system of the department, which then impacts the larger system of on and on, the organization, the partners, your ecosystem extends globally, especially now in the age of the digital world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're making a decision, it's thinking about things differently. Not, does this help our bottom line? Not, can we launch this new product and then everybody's, that's going to be reflected in everyone's performance reviews and we're going to get kudos and we're going to win this award. Maybe that product actually isn't good for the environment that you're putting it into. So it's understanding what systems you're nested in and taking that broad view, not only in terms of how big the picture can be, but also in terms of how deep it can be. How many generations forward are you looking? Are you looking at the impact of your actions now 7 generations forward? Because they are showing in epigenetics and lots of other areas that what my mother did is expressing in me. What I do expresses in my son. What he does now will express in his life later and then in his children. So we have a big impact that endures. And so as we're making these decisions, we're not just making them for ourselves, we're making them for future generations. We're making them for the world. So one of the first principles, and the basic principle, is understand your ecosystem, take a bigger picture, and ask yourself, is what we're doing life affirming? Does it feel life affirming? Because somewhere in this mechanistic story, the rational story that we are living, we lost the idea that we are nature. I am made from the same stars that the dolphins are made of, that the trees are made of. And that again sounds woo-woo, but they can prove it. And there's a Google talk from one of the engineers at Google who actually walks you through the math that proves that we are star material. And we are all from the same 9 stars that exploded. And so if you look at that, we are all interconnected. It is looking at the interconnections, which are often invisible, but it's being aware of those invisible things and making them visible and then choosing to work with them. You know, one of the things that I do with a lot of clients is instead of looking at an organization through an organogram where you get those square boxes and they look like they're connected by pipes, and it looks like a machine and it looks like something's not working. We just take out this division, it's gone, right? We look at it through the lens of a spider web because, and I like to do a really cool exercise with them before we even actually map this on paper, but it's to take a ball of yarn and to throw it between different members of the department, the team, the executive leadership group, because then they see who they're connected to and what happens. And then we say, here's a problem, an issue that you're dealing with. Show me in terms of your movement, how you feel about that. And then you see people, scrunch up because they're tense. This is a major issue. They feel urgency. Some people drop to the floor. Some people raise it up. And as they do, you literally see the tension in the system and what it's doing to the system. And then we talk about what happens if you start to regulate yourself. And this is where self-leadership comes into a regenerative approach. You regulate your system. You breathe and you relax. The problem hasn't changed, but your reaction to it is changing. And then you see the threads in the system that you don't normally see, but are there and are no less real just because we can't see them, but they relax and they balance. And at that point, we're much better positioned to figure out how we're going to approach this than when everyone is tense and pulled and it's literally ripping in some places the yarn. So there are a lot of buzzwords, I guess, and fuzzy, warm feeling words in a regenerative approach, but each one of them is tied to an evidence-based principle that I think is also an intuitive principle that we all feel inside. When the web looks like that and you're approaching a problem and there's tensions on all sides and you feel alone, like you're supposed to lock it up and have all the answers, your ability to solve that, everybody can feel that that's not really the best time to do that. And so where we can begin to bring our whole selves in, where we can take a bigger approach and see what our tension is doing to the system, where we take the self-leadership approach and reduce that tension and we see the system come into alignment, where we begin to build trust, then you see people come up with things that you never would have thought possible. Because if you have a culture of trust, people are willing to say, I don't know if this idea is going to work, but here's something. And then it does work. And then you get something that you never would have thought you would have tried. But that person would never have spoken up if they didn't feel psychologically safe. If you, as a leader, hadn't led from showing that I don't feel great today, but I'm going to hold myself accountable. I'm not going to take it out on you and not tell you why. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be courageous. And in doing so, it's very intentional because there are evidence-based outcomes that occur. And I'm going to own those, even if I can't see them. I can feel them, and the outcomes show that they're real.
To ask you, I'm trying to think. It all makes sense, but I'm trying to think how to take that to practice. So I'll just share something that happened with a client of mine, without exposing too much. Like basically, in the leadership meeting of that company, like they meet regularly, and every time they meet, there's a lot of tension and there are a lot of conflicts. And the conflict arises from different priorities, right? And it always boils down to prioritization and limited resources, limiting how much we can do versus the list of things we want to do, and how do we make decisions, and how do we and each person needs something for their department, and how do you balance that out? So how do you think those leaders can apply the regenerative leadership approach so they can work well together and make good decisions?
That's a great question. Well, so let's say they begin to look at the organization as a living organism, right? It isn't this concrete box that you walk into that produces plastic products that get sent out via metal trucks, right? Let's say it's a tree. You need each part of it, right? You need the soil. The soil has to be nourished. You need the roots that bring the nutrients up. You need the trunk. You need for it to fully express, you even need the leaves and the little berries. And you need seeds that then pollinate other places. And so when you look at different priorities of different departments, often those departments are they will come with a sense of urgency, and they will say, this has to be done. And you as the leader, that's where you have to back up, use your self-leadership, separate from that sense of urgency so that you can respond and not react. Because in reaction, you're either the type of leader that is influenced by that urgency and wants to make that happen, or you're the type of leader who wants that to go away and wants them to realize that they're not that important. So can you be the type of leader that can welcome their urgency and love the level of engagement that is? You see beyond that to they really care about what they're creating and what they're doing. Can you be the leader that steps back, breathes, centers yourself, and looks again at that big ecosystemic picture? Because when you can get curious and when you're not pushed and you start looking at what's emerging, what am I seeing? This is ready, this is not. It becomes, you're putting together a puzzle. And again, if you've got a sense of time pressure and you've got people shouting at you from all sides, putting together that puzzle in 10 seconds is going to be real hard.
Yeah.
And when you're done, those pieces aren't going to fit together quite right. And the whole thing isn't going to flow. And so if you can bring the level of energetic engagement down, you can center yourself. You can use your presence to do that. I think that is one of the most important leadership qualities you can possibly have. It is more important than any skill you can gain because it's the founding anchor. It uses everything else. You need your business knowledge, but without presence, your business knowledge doesn't have the same leadership effect. So essentially, you put that puzzle together in a much different way when you're asking for input, when you're able to express curiosity, and then that calls that to you. Other people become curious. You make them feel seen and heard. Yes, your project is amazing. It's so cool. Let's look at how it fits with the rest. And when you're transparent and you're open and you make them understand that they are an important piece of the tree, right? You can't do it without the roots. Can't do it without the leaves. You've got to have all the pieces. But again, a lot of it isn't what we do. It's how we do it. It changes everything. And so I think that's what my advice for a leader would be is to become present and look at how you're doing things, not what you're doing. Because you can do more of what you're doing in the same fashion that you're doing it. And for the new challenges that are arriving, it's not going to be enough. So if you want it to be enough, you've got to shift how you're doing it in order to create new what's. You know, the tree to survive, if it's being eaten by beetles, let's say, maybe it needs to be grafted with another type of tree, something that you would never consider doing because you're a pure tree. You've always been a pure tree. What is this grafting thing? But the idea is that when you're present, when you slow down, when you're all coming together, because you're all, the tree itself is responsible for itself and everybody's bought in. It's not just you as the leader, as one piece of the tree deciding for the whole tree. When you come together and you really act as a whole team, then seeing that actually a graft would work best becomes possible, even when it's never been done before.
Yeah, makes total sense. Basically, it's about, coming with a presence that is allowing you to basically become less kind of reactive to pressure. Be non-judgmental, listen, make other people feel heard and understood, and reach and have a discussion together and reach decisions together.
Now that's in the idealistic utopia. But this idea of time pressure and you not having any kind of fight with your spouse or problem with your child or things that aren't working out in your personal life, so you arrive to work with this flow and I guess what I want to say is that just like an agile sprint, it's an iteration. Each day you're a different.
Yeah.
Right? And you're refining and you're thinking, okay, this doesn't work. I know when I come in directly after a fight, I can't go into that meeting. So I'm going to start the meeting 5 minutes later. Or I'm going to open the meeting with a check-in with each person, and then we're going to do 3 breaths together, and that's going to help me be a better leader. So it's looking at lots of different ways to play with this kind of stuff. And then giving yourself grace. Because, that's where I get stuck personally, is there is a little monkey on my shoulder who says, you should have listened better. You should have done this differently. You should have known this was going to happen. Yeah. And then I essentially punish myself over and over.
Yeah.
And so that shows up in every interaction I have. Yeah. So where we can all just realize that we, like all of our staff, like all of our partners, all of the stakeholders involved are doing their best. And some days that expresses in a perfect bloom, and you show up just as you described, so open and non-judgmental and flowing. And some days you show up tense, but you're owning it.
Yeah.
And that counts.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, Megan, and I wish we could continue forever. So I guess before we end, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners that maybe we haven't touched on?
I think the most important thing for me to share with folks is that when we talk about taking a regenerative approach and that we were doing sort of business as usual and this is something new, this is not something where you're throwing out, in English, in the US, we say the baby with the bathwater. You're not throwing it all away. Regenerative approach builds. So you're taking the processes and the things and the what's that you have in place now, and you're getting curious about them. What already flows? What don't you, maybe you don't need to touch a lot of things. Maybe your governance already is very democratic. Maybe your governance is very open and creates a space of non-judgment, right? And maybe it's some other process in your supply chain that needs to switch, or maybe you're partnering with organizations that are not so life affirming. So you keep the things that work, and you can build or refine small things so that it's an organic step-by-step process. We're not saying uproot the tree and plant a new one. It doesn't work like that. So what I would like people to know is that it's possible. It's possible to start small, and over time, you see massive changes, and you become more resilient for the new challenges that we're facing.
That's wonderful. And thank you so much, Megan, for sharing that. And where can our listeners find you?
So they can find me on my website at meganwarrencoaching.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I would love to connect with folks if anybody has questions. I have lots of things to share.
Definitely. And I'll share in the notes the contact information. Anything you want to share, any resources, just send them my way. I'll put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for an insightful conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for having this podcast about leadership and exploring all of the different topics that you explore, because it is true. You're creating leaders, one conversation at a time.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the episode with Megan. I hope it helped you be the leader you are without trying to pretend everything is okay. Please share that with any woman who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the podcast to never miss an episode. And before you go, I just want to give you a quick sneak peek for next week's episode, which is going to be different. And we talk about what if the problem isn't that you're not using enough technology, but that you're using it without asking the right questions. And in the next episode From a Woman to a Leader, I'm talking with technology executive Rose Schamberger. And we talk about why customers don't buy tech, they buy solutions. Why AI, without a clear problem, creates more confusion, not value. And how women leaders can use technology to actually improve quality of life, not just productivity metrics. If you're leading teams, building products, or being pushed to use AI everywhere, like many of us do, this conversation will change how you think. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for being here today. Bye.